So let's jump into our faith stones, our faith skills. And we are actually at number 12, and that is develop written personal standards to live by. And that's these next three all go right in a row, and they all go together. So I'm glad this worked out, that we're getting a chance to do these together, and hopefully we'll get through all three of them. But that first one that talks about personal written standards to live by. And what I do with that one is I tell them that I had an uncle who used to be a football coach. This is actually the story that's in the book. I'm just going to tell you the real story without the fake names, because I don't remember the fake names. But I had an uncle who was a football coach at a small college in Pennsylvania. And when I was about 14, I went to one of the games, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching the game, and there was this guy next to my uncle who had a clipboard. And my uncle would talk to this guy with the clipboard before every offensive play, and he'd send in this player, and of course they're running into play, and they'd run this play. And so I was just kind of fascinated watching this guy with the clipboard. And so I eventually get a chance to ask my uncle, what is the deal with the clipboard, this guy with the clipboard? And he explained to me, which basically is pretty much common knowledge these days, that they decided on Tuesday which plays they were going to run on Saturday. They don't wait till Saturday when they're in the heat and the emotion of the game to decide which play to run. They don't, when it's fourth down and 8 yards to go in the fourth quarter, and if you don't get the first down, you lose. You can't run a play that's designed to get 1 or 2 yards, but if the clock's ticking and everybody's nervous and everything and all the emotion, you can make a mistake. So they take all the emotion out of it by making their decisions on which plays they were going to run on Tuesday, and then they practice those like all week. So what I tell young people is that we need to develop some personal standards. I tell them two things. One is that you already have standards. You have standards. You just don't have them written down yet. I know your parents have standards for you, and I know that when you're here at the church, we have standards for you as well. So there's lots of standards in your life. So we're going to take a moment and we're going to write some of these down. And I tell them we're going to write them down now, because I don't want you to try to figure out what your standard is once you get in the middle of something that might be emotional. So the first thing we do is I just ask them the question, what standards, or what are some areas where we could have some standards? And then we just brainstorm some things on the board, and we end up with 10, 12, 15, 18 things on the board. And there are things like, things like smoking or drugs or alcohol, or they might say something about a tire, or they might say something about humor or relationships or whatever. And so we put all these topics up on the board, and then we ask them to simply write down, and there's a little standard page, which I'm going to bring up, and
it's available in their handout section.
Okay, so it's available in your handout section, so I don't have to bring it up. And so look in your handout section. The first one that says standards, number 1. You're welcome to look at that if you would like. And let's see, where did I don't see myself anymore. I probably should, right?
Oh, they can still see you.
Okay. I just can't see me, so I don't know where I went. But I'm going to just kind of look straight ahead. And so I got the sheets right here, but you can pull it up there on that standards handout. And basically, all it says is that my wife went through and defined the word standards with Webster's and all. We talk about the benefits of having standards and list some areas that would be good to have standards. And then I tell them, and if they're middle schoolers, just for like the first time, I want you to come up with one standard, okay? If you're really into this, come up with a second or a third. I don't need 40 standards, okay? I don't need you to have 40 standards. Just come up with one today, maybe 2, 3 max, okay? We just want to introduce this concept. And you can see on that handout, and I'll hold it up for you here if you haven't pulled it up, it just says, in the area of my standard is. And so that's the question we ask them. In the area of my standard is, and we have them fill that out. So an example would be, and I tend to give them examples, but I do several things. My wife and I want to be very careful, and some people may look at this differently, but we want to be very careful not to I don't want to say not to influence their standards, but we don't want to write their standards. We want them to come up with their standards. So I give them 2 generic standards as an example. And so one of my examples would be, I just tell them in the area of sports, whether I'm watching or whether I'm playing, I tell them in the area of sports, my standard is to win with humility and lose with dignity. And so that's my standard. And so if my team is playing your team and we destroy your team, I'm going to be a gracious winner, and I'm not doing the in-your-face stuff and giving you a hard time the next day at church because we destroyed you on national TV. You know, that's just like middle school stuff. Well, they are middle schoolers, but you know, so and likewise, if your team destroys my team, I want to lose with dignity. You know, I don't want to yell and scream and rant and rave and throw things at the TV and blame the refs and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you know, I think there's a sign behind me that says something about having eternal perspective on life, and so that's important. So that's one of my standards. The other standard I give them, as I tell them in the area of humor, my standard is to not participate in humor at the expense of others. I tell them that's a standard I don't do as well with, simply because our entire culture is built on making fun of people. I mean, every comedian, every sitcom, you know, movies, comedies, they're all about making fun of people. And so it's just something that my wife and I are committed to, a life of affirmation. So we try really, really hard not to, participate in humor at the expense of others. That's hard when you work with middle schoolers because they set themselves all the time up. You know, they're always setting themselves up, and they'll say something and I'm like, oh, I could say something that right now that would be really, really funny that everybody else would laugh at, but it would probably hurt this person's feeling. I just can't do that. And so, and sometimes I make a mistake there, and I apologize to kids if I need to. But yeah, because we want them to feel loved and cared for, and we want them to feel firm. So those are just the 2 standards that I throw out there. Then we just kind of let them go, and they'll come up with various standards. And after they come up with 1 or 2 or 3, then what we do is. We get to share those a bit, and then after we share those, then is when I might bring in some high school or some college age people and have them share some of their standards. And at that point, they've been kind of acclimated to this process a bit, and then once they hear, you know, high schoolers and college age people share standards, oftentimes they write down the same thing. So it's really crucial that I bring in, you know, people who have good standards because they really listen to those high schoolers and those college age folks. And so that's how we get it started. Even with the high schoolers, once they get a little older, we tell them still only have about 8. This is not something where I want you to come up with 40 standards. I mean, you may have 40 standards. We probably all do if we took our time and kind of, you know, looked at our lives and everything that we do and don't do. But I want them to have those standards. Important stuff. And one of the big ones I think is entertainment. So I do talk about that. And although I don't give them a standard for entertainment, I just ask them, where are your lines? You know, where are your lines to the point where if you were watching something on TV, at what point would you turn the channel? You know, where is your line? You know, what has to happen on a TV show before you kind of go, oh, I'm out of this? Or what has to happen in a movie before you're to the point where you're uncomfortable and you kind of go, you know, that I'm out of this. And so I ask it that way, let them kind of wrestle with that, let them kind of put those lines where those lines need to be for who they are. I tell them that they have standards, and they know this for attire. They know when they come here. If they work with our little kids club on Thursday night, they know that we have standards. You cannot come to a little kids club with a T-shirt that says Megadeth. Okay, we just don't do that. And we have a bag of T-shirts. We sometimes have to put over kids, so they say, yeah, that T-shirt's not really going to work tonight, so we're going to have to give you something else. Which is why we came up with team shirts, which is one thing, so kids can have a team shirt. Anyway, so that's kind of our concept on standards. One of my favorite things to do, and one of the other things we talked about last time that we were on this in November, was faith advances, not just advances that we do with catechism kids, but our faith advances. And they're actually, and I say this about a lot of things, but they're actually my favorite thing to do. And faith advances are simply, I love to be in a room with families, and I'm going to say the last time I did this was probably about a year ago, unfortunately. Oh no, I did one last fall. Okay, but anyway, there were probably 8 or 9 families in the room, and the families were pretty much all ages, but it's ideal for what I do for like 4th grade on up. And so the family's there, and we walk through some of the stuff that we've been talking about with faith skills and faith advances. But when we get to this whole concept of personal standards, I love to have families sitting together working on personal standards. Like they work on them individually, then we have people sit by family, and it gives mom and dad that chance to do the old Joshua 24:15 thing. It just says, as for me and my household, this is how we're going to serve the Lord. These are our standards. And when young people see other young people and other moms and dads all sharing standards, kids kind of go, oh, my mom and dad aren't, the only meanies around. Everybody, that we all have standards, and we're developing things with curfews and such.